Hi, my name's Scott Davis. I am a mentor for Team 2052 KnightKrawler from Irondale High School in New Brighton, Minnesota. And the purpose of this video is to describe how we do our accounting. It's sort of twofold. We want to make sure that we're recording this video because we want to have a training guide, basically for anyone who would follow after me to do our accounting and do our taxes, so they understand the process that KnightKrawler has been using to do our taxes. But we're also creating a way for any other team that might need might be in this situation where they need to track their funds better, they need to have budgeting better, they need to be able to have better access to their accounting numbers for taxes, and they're looking for something new and different. I am not an accountant. I am not an attorney. You should be contacting your financial advisor or attorney or accountant or professional of any type before you do any of this stuff to verify that, yes, this sounds like the right way to do it, or no, there's some problems with this system for my state or just in general. I don't proclaim to be an expert in tax law or accounting processes or anything like that. Having said that, I've been an entrepreneur. I've been a small business owner for about 15 years. I've done my own books that entire time. I pay a professional accountant so that that person contacts me when I have a problem and I've done something wrong. And so I've learned a lot over the years about how to do accounting and how to manage the finances of a business. And so what I'm going to share with you today is based on that experience. I've used QuickBooks most of my business career for my businesses. And so some of the terminology that you might hear me say in this process are going to be things that might be familiar if you're a Quicken or a QuickBooks user. Everything we do here is going to be cash-based accounting. Accrual-based accounting is probably not something you really need to be or should be even doing anyway in your business. Cash-based accounting is simpler, and it's what almost all small businesses are doing, and probably what your accountant will tell you should do if you even understand the difference between a cash-based or an accrual-based accounting. In a cash-based accounting system, you would manage it like you would manage your checkbook for your home finances. I'm also, KnightKrawler has been a 501c3 registered nonprofit for many, many years. So this process will be built as if you're running a business, because that's what a 501c3 is you're running a nonprofit, a legitimate nonprofit business. And if your booster club or robotics team or however you're structured is bringing in over $50,000 a year in what's called revenue or intake, the funds that you collect, then you're required to file the 990EZ tax form for your nonprofit. If you're bringing in less than $50,000 a year for your nonprofit, you just file basically a postcard every year saying, yeah, we declare that our revenue for the year was under $50,000. $50,000 to someone who might be new to a booster club or new to a robotics team might sound like a lot, and if you're a rookie team, maybe it is a lot. But if you're in a situation like our team is in, where the team is funded and run by the nonprofit organization and not funded and run by the school, we collect student activity fees directly from the students for our activity. Unlike maybe the tennis team or the wrestling team or the football team would pay that fee to the high school, we collect the fee directly from the students and manage the money. And we also collect the travel fees. So if your organization says, well, we reserved everybody a hotel, it'll cost, students have to find a group of 4 and it'll cost them $100 or $200 for that room for the 2 nights or the 3 nights that we're traveling away. If you have a team of 50 students like we do and 8 chaperones and 6 to 8 mentors who are traveling, and you go to Detroit for championships for 3 days, you're probably collecting $30,000 for hotel fees. That gets you really close to the 50 grand. And it doesn't matter if you brought in that money and immediately turned around and paid that to a hotel, that's revenue. And so if you are managing $50,000 in funds a year or more, you're going to have to file that 990EZ with the IRS to kind of account for the funds that you bring in and pay out every year as part of your organization. So let's talk about the system that we're using and why we're using it, and let's define sort of the problem statement of what the challenge was. We used a variety of different sort of systems over the years. We've used Quicken. We used sort of a Google Docs format where things were in lots of different spreadsheets to keep track of these are travel costs, and these are student costs, and these are robot costs, and they were sort of all spread around the place. And then there was a way to bring it all together, and it really helped keep things separate and keep things in their bucket, but it made it really hard for sort of the person who was in charge of overall finances to look and say, where are we at? How are we doing? What is sort of our number of where we're at today? And it was easy to make a mistake on one sheet and fail to transfer that over to another sheet, and then two things were out of sync, and it was kind of tricky to track that all down. So a year ago, I decided I needed to come up with a new system and in terms of how we were going to manage our money. And the problems, the kind of the requirements that we were dealing with came down to this set that I'm going to go over now. One problem is that it sort of had to be open. It had to be easily available. We couldn't have someone using Quicken on a laptop because only that one person could then see what was going on. And if you want to have good financial policy within your organization, you really need to make sure that multiple people at any point in time can see what's going on with the books. How can we, what's the bank account balance? What have we spent money on? Those things need to be easily accessible to the leadership within your organization. And so we didn't want to have a solution where you had to have access to a machine in order to be able to check the books. And it had to be inexpensive. QuickBooks Online is pretty expensive, and if you look at what it costs to pay for an online accounting system, that's a laptop or maybe a used laptop for your team. And wouldn't you rather take that money and put that in the hands of a student than to pay for that online service? And plus, that online service is, even if you had QuickBooks Online and you had multiple logins so that every single member on your team could get access to it, which would be very expensive. A lot of them aren't going to understand how to run an accounting software. They haven't been trained on it. And so it might be really difficult for someone to get in there and understand, how does this thing even work? So that was one, is it needed to be low cost or free, and it had to be something where everybody could get to without having to have access to a single machine or pay for lots of user accounts. The second thing is it had to be easily accessible to people, and it had to be sort of intuitive, and anything accounting is sort of not going to be intuitive. But one of the challenges is that I'm a software developer by nature, by trade. I've been doing software development for 20 some years. And as a software developer, my first inclination is well, I'll just build something. And I had to fight that. And I think that a lot of people probably make that mistake of, well, I'll just build something to track our incomes and our expenses and do all the categories, because I'm not going to be on the team forever. And I didn't want to be in a situation where if something happened with my family, something happened with my job, and I could no longer be part of the team, even without a proper transition, I needed to have something that other people could pick up and say, oh, there's this problem, let me fix it. If you build a custom solution that runs on a custom cloud architecture platform and someone finds a problem, if you don't know how that thing was built, you're stuck, right? And then you're starting over again because you can't fix what's broken. So it needed to be something that anybody could kind of pick up and run with a little bit of knowledge of the system that was there. It had to be customizable. In business, in nonprofits, in school, you're always going to find something where, hey, we need to add this new thing. We need to account for this new kind of money. Maybe you get some type of funds that are guaranteed, but you don't have them. And how are you going to track those? Or, for example, maybe you get funds that a sponsor pays directly to First, which is the organization that runs robotics. You need to sort of track that because they're a sponsor, and you need to make sure that you recognize them on the website, and you account for people that supported your team properly with the IRS, but yet you never actually saw the funds. They never went to you. They went directly to the other organization. And so you need to have those types of things where that's not going to fit real well in the traditional accounting system, because the funds never touched your accounts. And so you need to have the ability to do weird things like that to fit your specific situations. We needed a system that could be multi-purpose. And what I mean by that is you need to have the traditional ledger of here's my checkbook and here's how I spent the money. Money came in, money went out, and you need that traditional accounting system. But we also need to do budgeting. We need to understand what kind of funds are we going to need for the year, and how are we going to fundraise, and how are we going to approach sponsors. We need to be able to track what students have paid what fees. If we have a situation where we're collecting optional cash to prepay lunches at an event, we need to know who prepaid a lunch without having to keep that in a separate system. We wanted everything together that could handle the multi-purpose part of what the organization does. It's got to be tracking funds, it's got to be tracking budget, you've got to see how you did compared to the budget. We need to be able to track students. If we have activity fees, if we have travel fees, we need to know who's paid and who hasn't paid. Coaches too. When we travel, coaches don't get a free ride. So we have to know what coaches have paid and what coaches haven't paid for their hotel expenses. We needed to be able to track all of our accounts in one place. So that's checking. Actually might be two checking. In fact, I would recommend that you have two checking accounts if you're doing anything like GoFundMe or PayPal. I would highly discourage you from dumping your PayPal and GoFundMe accounts into your checking account that might have $50,000 in it or even $10,000 in it. Don't give those internet organizations, even those, the two that I mentioned are very trustworthy organizations, don't give them access to your checking account with all your money in it. Set up a second checking account and have those funds be deposited into that account, which you can then transfer into your main account. Credit cards. We needed a system that could both manage our checking account and our credit cards and PayPal balance and even a cash box balance for when we do fundraisers and we have a cash box. We wanted to have a single system that would show us how much money do we have, how much money have we spent, and we needed to have that all in one spot so it was easy to kind of search through for transactions. It was easy to see where we were at. By the way, a quick comment on credit cards is that I know a lot of organizations, and KnightKrawler was this way before I got involved with the finances, where we would just give the coaches that needed to buy stuff, so the people that were buying things from Andy Mark or Menards, Home Depot, or Office Max, we would just give them a debit card. That's probably not the most fiscally responsible thing to do in an organization where you may have $10, $20, $50,000 in your account. Instead, I would highly recommend that you get a credit card for your organization. The reason why you would do that is because if you purchase something, whether you physically handed somebody your card or you punched it in online, and someone were to get access to your card information and start charging things fraudulently, it's a lot easier to solve those problems with credit cards. And this is the way my banker explained it to me. I had said, well, but they both have Visa or MasterCard protection on it, right? I still have the liability protection in both cases, correct, if there's fraud? And my banker person, she said, well, that's true. The difference is that on a credit card, the funds never ever left your account because you haven't paid your bill yet, as long as you detect the fraud, before you pay your bill. But in a debit card situation, if you have fraud in your account, that money has left your account, and it may take months for you to get that money back. You will eventually get it back if it was fraud, just like with a credit card, if it was fraud, you won't have to pay for it. The difference is those funds will be locked up and gone when you might need them. And so when you dispute a claim on a credit card, that fee sits there and you haven't paid it yet. And so therefore you still have access to the funds while the fraud is being sort of mitigated. So highly, highly encourage any organizations out there who are spending lots of money on a card not to walk around with a debit card for their primary checking account, because if they're in the event of fraud, it's much safer to do that with a credit card. We needed a system that would be able to handle the fact that we're buying things with checks, and then we're buying things with credit cards, and it needs to be easy and all fit together and all work well together, all in one place. Finally, taxes. I've already talked a little bit about taxes, but we needed a system that would make it easy at the end of the year to be able to say, what do I need for line 1? What do I need for line 6? What do I need for line 28? We needed a way to simplify some of that, so we weren't hand tallying things up at the end of the year as much as possible. There are some things you just can't avoid that you sort of have to do that way, but we needed to do it. We wanted a system that would make doing taxes easier, because nobody likes doing taxes. Why not make it a little bit simpler then, if possible? And finally, forecasting. This was one that we as a team always struggled with, and I think a lot of teams probably struggle with. And that's sort of a how are we doing? And are we going to be short? Are we going to have enough funds? Are we going to have extra funds? Where are we at? And the where are we at question is a really, really challenging question to ask, because unlike a traditional business where you may have daily revenue or weekly revenue or monthly revenue, you can look at that revenue and say, this month's a little bit higher, a little bit lower than last month. That isn't something that usually happens with robotics. We usually get this big chunks of funds from sponsors, or maybe a reimbursement from the school, or maybe we'll do a concerted fundraiser, whether it's a bake sale or raking leaves or whatever it might be, and we'll get these big chunks of money. And it's really hard to compare one month to the next in terms of how are we doing, because it's not steady cash flow. This is not the way most businesses work. And you may also decide, hey, we've got the sponsor who's been a long-time sponsor. They always give us $3,000. We can pretty much count on that. And you put that in your budget, and then suddenly something bad happens, like coronavirus or recession or something worse. Maybe they go out of business, and what happens is they can't give you any money, or they can't give you as much as they normally would. How do you adjust your projections on what your revenue is going to be from sponsors, so that you can see in December, in January, in March, how are we doing? Is there something that we need to do differently? Maybe we can't buy that thing we were planning to buy. Maybe we can't send as many people as we were planning to send. Maybe we had to add a travel fee to students. Those are things that you need to be able to do on the fly. And we need a system not only where you could do a budget, but you could do sort of forecasting off of that, of how are we doing. In an organization where you're bringing in $50,000 a year, I'm using that number because that's sort of the threshold for the 990 EZ. I can tell you for KnightKrawler, we're substantially above that. I think $75,000 was 2019, which was the last year we had a full season before coronavirus. When you're dealing with that kind of money, the difference of being a few $1,000s short and trying to figure out how do we deal with that with students if we're traveling to Champs, and what is our fee going to be for food or for hotel, it's a big deal. And so having that forecasting to figure out where are we at and how are we doing, it's really important for a nonprofit who often has limited funds, so that we're asking our students for the least amount of money possible, so we can still support the program and travel to these big events if we do happen to make it to the championship tournaments that are multiple states away from Minnesota. So with all that said, those are our requirements. It's a lot of requirements. And so the system that we've come up with satisfies all those requirements. And that's what we're going to be going through in this series of videos is what we built, how we built it, how you can build it, and how you can maintain it. The options really came down to either Google Docs or Excel. Google Docs or Excel fit all those solutions, but it required a lot of setup, which is why we're building these videos. We chose Google Docs because it's something that everyone in the organization was familiar with. It's what the school uses. And so we wanted to pick a technology that worked well for everybody. We already have all of our stuff in Google Docs for the team. We didn't want to have the accounting someplace else. But you could have done this with Excel. You could have done this with Excel. And if you're going to do it with Excel, to achieve the you don't need to have access to the laptop situation, I would recommend putting it in Microsoft Live Drive or OneDrive, and managing that Excel document up in the cloud so that you could share the document with everyone on the team and manage the document up in the cloud. You don't want to build it in Excel if it only runs on one person's laptop. And so anyway, we chose Google Docs. One nice thing about Google Docs is that it has versioning. So you can go to the file menu and say, I want to mark this version as maybe November reconciled. So you downloaded all your transactions from the bank, you verified the account numbers match, and you put in, I reconciled the account on this date. Or maybe maybe you have an event, like you traveled and you collected all the fees from all the students and you want to version the document saying all fees collected or something like that for first event or first regional, whatever it might be. So the nice thing about that, you can do versioning. I suspect you can probably do versioning in Excel if you host it in OneDrive as well. The other thing is permissions. So in Google Docs, you can lock down permissions into a single sheet in a Google Docs. You can have a Google Doc that has multiple sheets, and we're going to show how that works in our system. But you can lock down permissions to just to some of the sheets to just one or two people, so that no one can go in there and modify the numbers that have been sort of reconciled out. You really only want, I would recommend only having one person designated as your bookkeeper, as your treasurer, who modifies that document. If you get in a situation where that person suddenly disappears, you can always re-import that document into a brand new spreadsheet and reset it up. The risk of having two people having their fingers in there and someone not realizing that someone else made a change is pretty high. I would highly encourage you to have one person managing your finances. Probably you're not going to have so many expenditures that and receipts, revenue coming in, that one person couldn't handle it. But I would, just for the sake of simplicity and avoiding errors, human errors, I would say having one person run it makes the most sense. And so you can set up permissions so that only one person can edit the document, but everyone can see it. And finally, the nice thing about Google Docs is it was a familiar tool. I think that most people, if you're mentoring a robotics team, or if you're an adult in general, you've probably run into a spreadsheet. And so working within a spreadsheet, while they might be scary for some people, I think a lot of people get the basic concept, and it's not like running into QuickBooks Online or running into some other accounting software and trying to understand what's a credit, what's a debit. I don't understand how these two things work. We sort of get the idea of a checkbook ledger. At least I hope most people understand a checkbook ledger, and Google Sheets is it's a very familiar concept in that way. So that's sort of the backstory of where we're at, why you should care, what's important, the requirements, the problem statement, all of those things. And in the next segment here, we're going to start building out from scratch a tool that we use to track all of our money and do all of our budgeting and do all of our forecasting and help prepare our taxes. So there you go. See you in the next segment.